In 1969, I was 9 years old and lived about a half a mile down the road from an old church cemetery. There were two other older houses there. No one lived in them. There were strange things happening quite often around where we lived back then. I remember one of the strange things that happened very well. My dad worked evenings from roughly 3 p.m. until about 11, just 3 miles down the road from our house. My mom, sister, and I had just gone to bed when we started to hear a bumping sound on the back of the house. My sister and I ran from the bedroom we shared in the back of the house to the front of the house where my mom and dad's bedroom was. My sister and I were terrified, so my mom let us sleep with her until dad came home at about 11 that night. Their bedroom had 2 windows, side by side, on the front of the house, above the porch. You could see through the curtains at night, due to the streetlight out front. We were lying there after not hearing any more noise when all of a sudden we heard something on the front of the porch. My mom saw it at first and sat up in bed. That made my sister and I notice her staring out the window. When we turned our gaze from my mom to the window, we saw what looked like a very large dog on the front porch. It was walking to the front door upright on its back legs. When it reached the front door, it shook it violently. It was as tall as the door, and we could see it scratching at the screen with its front paws. It remained there for what seemed like 15 minutes, but it was probably only a minute or two. Mom didn't say a word for the first minute or two. She just shushed us until it turned and walked about 10 feet to the steps on its back legs. Just before it reached the steps and went down, it went down on all 4 legs. My mom told us to go back to sleep, and we eventually did. I don't remember her telling my dad, but I do remember this well. It was 6 to 6.5 feet tall while standing upright on its back legs. You could see all its facial features, its ears, snout, and its head. Those features made it resemble a German shepherd. We hadn't seen anything that looked or acted like that thing in the area before that night. A lot of strange things happened there. I can't say it was a Dogman, but it did walk on its back legs for several feet. Another time, when I was young, my sister, who I shared the back bedroom with at the time, was at our grandmother's house, spending the night. I had gone to bed, but wasn't quite asleep yet. My mom had my bedroom window open so air could come in. It was a hot night that night. The back of our house was high off the ground. Consequently, the bottom of my bedroom window was about 8 feet or so off the ground. I had been lying there on my back when I rolled over onto my stomach, toward the window. My foot went off the bed on the window side and wound up being only a few inches from the window. All of a sudden, something touched my foot. I don't remember if it grabbed my foot or what, but the screen ripped, the curtain fell, and I scrambled off the bed and out of my bedroom, into the living room where my mother was. She had heard the commotion and saw what I was frightened about. She asked me what was wrong, so I told her what had happened. She went into my bedroom and saw the hole in the screen and that the curtain was down. She also saw how it was hanging halfway out of the window. She didn't know what to think, so she called my dad home from work. He came home to check it out and walked around the house before coming in. He said he hadn't seen anything. At first, he didn't even believe my mother. It wasn't until he saw that the curtain was hanging out the window that he believed her. He couldn't figure it out either. We didn't have any problems with prowlers or anything like that. At first, they thought I had stuck my foot through the screen. I don't think that's what happened because I wasn't even sleeping yet. I just couldn't have done that. My encounter took place many years ago. I never had the faintest explanation for it until a couple months ago, actually, when I randomly stumbled across Dogman on the internet. I was in my early 20s, working swing shifts at the time and commuting about 100 miles each way, so it was usually around 2 in the morning by the time I got home. I saw the monster, as I called it, on the northernmost section of the Trunk Road in Matanuska Valley in Alaska. This area is almost smack in between the towns of Palmer and Wasilla. I was only about 10 miles from home at that point, so it must have been around 2 a.m. Trunk Road is a narrow 2-lane road anyway, consisting of nothing but twists and turns. The surrounding terrain is somewhat swampy and thick with black spruce. It was late October at this time, days before Halloween. There was no snow on the ground, but it was cold enough to be wary of ice. I was driving an '82 Subaru, going about 20 miles an hour around a curve, when my headlights caught a large, dark figure up ahead. I'm bad at judging distance, maybe 6 car lengths away. I instinctively let off the gas, coasting just a little bit closer, and at first I assumed it was a moose, as the area is infested with them, but no, it was standing upright. Bear? No, not a bear. It looked strange. Tall enough to be an uncommonly large bear, but far too slender, and it looked like it had spikes running down its neck and back. A Halloween prop? It was an odd but effective place for one. All those thoughts ran through my head in a fraction of a second. The car was still coasting closer, and I could see more details vividly. It was standing in profile, gazing across the road. I could clearly see its wolfish muzzle, large, upright ears. The spikes on its back were in fact clumps of fur. Its spine curved in a smooth, very natural-looking way. It was standing in the ditch just inches from the pavement. Because I was focused on its upper body, I do not recall anything about its back legs or if it even had a tail. I did see its front legs, though. Very doggy-looking, hanging awkwardly down and slightly toward its front, exactly as you'd expect if a dog stood upright. While it clearly had a canine look, there was still something off about it that I cannot articulate. It was perfectly still, and at this point, given the proximity to Halloween, I was quite convinced it was some sort of Halloween prop because it was clearly not any kind of existing animal. I was deeply impressed and gently stepped on the brakes, intending to stop and examine this animal more closely. Then it turned its head towards me. In the tiny fraction of a second that it took for it to swivel its head, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The fluidness of its movement removed any and all doubt that this was some kind of prop. It was horribly, terrifyingly alive. The pale off-white glow of its eyeshine in the headlights destroyed any possibility of a human in a costume. I think I sat there gaping at it in shock for a few seconds, the car barely moving by now, but still inching closer. As I was almost upon it, I think it could have leaned forward and touched the car if it had wanted. I had to look up to see its face. Again, I'm a bad judge of such things, but I'm only 5'4", and it was a hell of a lot taller than I was. Tall like a polar bear standing up. I don't know, maybe like 7-8 feet. I really can't say. I snapped out of my trance and I slammed on the gas. The car fishtailed and I prepared myself for death by monster, as I was certain I'd end up in the ditch, but the tires miraculously caught the pavement and I drove like a complete maniac all the way home, never once looking back. I have only been on that section of the road a few times since, never alone and never in the dark. For the next several years of driving that commute, I went about 20 plus miles out of the way just to avoid Trunk Road. The thing never made any aggressive moves, but there was something about it that felt very, predatory. I never saw anything remotely like it again and never heard any stories or sounds about it in the area. While scanning the valley floor for sheep a mile from my house, I noticed 2 loping figures. Initially, I thought the figures were coyotes or stray dogs, but as the 2 figures neared an old sunken vehicle, I realized that the things were about the size of the vehicle, nearly 8 feet long, and no animal could be that big on the reservation. I watched the 2 figures until they disappeared into the woods across the valley. It was starting to get dark, but the moon was bright enough, so I walked without a light. As I walked down the mountain, I heard something yelling. It was like a howl or a yell. I started to hurry at this point. Then, When I got to my house, I locked the door and spent the night listening to the strangest sounds. I'm sure it was a skinwalker or a werewolf or a dogman or something. This is back in 1987, when I was just 17 years old at the time. My dad and mom had taken my little brother and sister to Tucson, Arizona to do something for the day. We lived in a trailer, in a rural area outside of Sierra Vista. We had 2 horses, 2 dogs, a cow, and chickens on the small amount of land that we had owned. As the oldest son, it was my job to feed and take care of them. On the night in question, it was a stormy monsoon rain with thunder and lightning going on. But like monsoons can be, they rage and then settle into a lull, and rage again. I was getting ready to settle down and watch a good movie, when all of a sudden, my 2 dogs started barking and wouldn't shut up when I told them to calm down. In the previous week or so, before that, my dogs had been acting up and barking a lot at night. I attributed it to the coyotes that I'd been hearing howling in the night. So I got my dad's 30-30 and just 1 bullet, in case I had to shoot or to scare off a coyote or even kill it, even if it was rabid. I rested the loaded rifle near the wall by the back door and turned on the floodlights outside the trailer. The rain had just stopped, so I looked out by the window near the front door and saw our 2 horses and cows staring, as if through the front door, to the back door of the trailer, where the dogs were barking. I thought, maybe they're scared of the coyotes. So I grabbed the rifle and opened up the back door. As I was getting near the back door, I heard my dogs whimpering and crying. Now I was thinking, is it a pack of coyotes? So I put a few bullets in my pocket, figuring I could load them if I didn't like what I saw. I opened the door, and the darndest thing happened. My 2 dogs beeline rushed past me to the center of the trailer and hunkered down in the kitchen, where I think it was safest for them. Mud was everywhere on the floor from their paws, and I was pissed because I knew I'd have to clean it up. So I closed the door and went to try to get my dogs just to get out. But they wouldn't budge and squirmed out of my arms when I tried to grab them. They were terrified at this point. Now I was mad at the coyotes and grabbed the rifle to go run them off or kill them. The trailer sits on a foundation of blocks. The front and back doors are accessible by a small set of stairs. I'm 5'6", by the way. I opened the back door and was looking out into the darkness at that point. I was about to step out when I saw a set of eyes looking back at me out of the darkness. From the top of my head in the trailer to the ground is around 7+ feet or so, and here is a set of eyes looking right at me, level and square on. I was like, darn, coyote must be on the small gravel hill we used to pave the road, or it's a bird on a mesquite bush. But I was thinking to myself, that monsoon was awfully bad and it rained hard. What kind of bird would hunker down on a mesquite bush, and why would a coyote be out in a downpour? So, I raised my rifle and drew a bead on the eyes when lightning lit up the night. All of a sudden, the lightning illuminated the small gravel hill, and that's like 6 feet high, and the surrounding mesquite bushes. The light winks out as fast as it appeared, but from the lightning, though, there was nothing on the gravel hill and no bird on any of the mesquite bushes. Then it dawned on me. Whatever it was a very tall being and was still staring at me. A sense of dread crept over me all of a sudden as I realized that the 30-30 only had 1 measly bullet, and if I missed, there was no way I'd be able to reload before it was on me. I kept the gun pointed at it as I quickly closed the door. I locked the door, realizing this trailer would never withstand whatever it was that was out there if it had decided to attack. I locked the front door and turned on all the lights in the house. I grabbed all the bullets, the 30-06 and the .22 rifle, and then went into the kitchen with the dogs. I then loaded each rifle full on. I hugged my dogs, and I prayed that whatever it was would just go away and just not attack. I stayed awake that whole night until my parents got back. My dad was furious that all the lights were on. My dad even checked outside for coyotes, but whatever it was gone. In October of 1972, my husband, our two babies, my brother, and I left for Leavenworth, Kansas in our 1968 Volkswagen van on a camping trip to a recreational area in Arkansas called Beaver Lake. When we finally got there, we found a fairly remote campsite at the far end of the park. We wanted to be alone as the babies woke often during the night and needed to feed. We didn't want to disturb any other campers. Shortly after pulling into our campsite, my brother pitched his tent next to the van. The rest of us were going to sleep in the van. The campsite was in an area with a horseshoe-shaped, rocky, terraced ledge that rose from around 50 feet to around 100 as it curved behind and around the four campsites. Because of mature trees and thick brush, daylight sometimes had trouble poking into our specific spot. Fast forward to that night. Sometime around 3:30 a.m. is when I heard some animal sounds on the ridge that I thought were being made by coyotes. The babies were asleep, and all was quiet otherwise. I peered out the window, but couldn't see what was making the sounds because it was still so dark. Still hearing odd yips and howls, I laid back down on the back seat. Moments later, there was a huge crashing bang on the van wall right next to my head. My husband leapt up out of full sleep. My brother bolted out of his tent and jumped into the van with us. We were all in panic, looking in every direction, trying to see what had hit the van like that. My brother finally yelled that he saw something moving behind the van. We all turned just in time to see a large shadow moving about 20 feet behind the van, from left to right. After about 20 minutes had passed without any of us seeing movement out there, my husband and brother went out to inspect the van for damage, but found none. We then started hearing pounding steps coming from the brush. About 50 feet behind us, the guys eased back into the front seat of the van, and that's when my husband turned on the headlights and stepped on the brake pedal for the rear light. Instantly, there was a huge commotion. He started the engine, and that's when, in the glow from the headlights, we could see a hairy thing 10 feet away and coming toward the van. As it got closer, its silver-tipped hairs glistened in the light. It had a grayish streak from its shoulders down to its back to its butt. The creature was walking on two legs and was around 7 or 8 feet tall, had a huge barrel chest and skinny legs. It never gave us a good view of its eyes, so I couldn't tell you what they looked like. I could see that its face was not ape-like. It was dog-like. Its ears had tufts of fur on top of them, and it was very human-like in the movements and just general body structure. It moved so smoothly and quickly, just around to the back of the van where it followed the base of the ridge, away from us, and that's when it let out a menacing huff and a low rumbling growl like a dog. Insanely, my husband and brother bolted from the van, trying to get a better look, and that's when a shower of gravel came at us. My husband and brother tore back into the van and burned up the road, getting us out there. I kept looking out back the window, and they looked in the rearview mirrors, but none of us ever saw it again. It just didn't seem like a Sasquatch with what we had seen. It seemed like it was too dog-like in its face, and it wasn't even, I don't know, it was just weird. It was too slim in the body to even be a Bigfoot. I still have PTSD-like feelings just to this day from this encounter. The encounter I'd like to share is not my own, but that of my mother. She used to tell me stories when I was young about strange things she had experienced in her life. I remembered this type of Dogman encounter while listening to a show on YouTube. There's not particularly a lot of detail to this encounter, but what you may find interesting is the location. The sighting took place in Sacramento, California around 1953, which is not too far from the state's capital. Using Google Maps to get an approximate location and lay of the land, I can see the sighting area was about 1,000 feet to the west and of the perpendicular to the American River. Across the river from the east bank, it's only about another 2,000 feet east to the state capital. So this took place fairly close to a heavily populated area. My mother states when she was about 12 years old, she was laying on the couch, watching television. That's when she noticed a scary dog face looking at her through a low-pane window. The window was either on or by the door, and I'm unclear on this fact. In any event, the head, she said, must have been about 2 to 2.5 feet above the ground. She covered her face in fright with her pillow, and after a minute or so, she snuck a peek, figuring she must be imagining things. She saw it was gone and felt a little bit better. But then, she noticed it was now looking through another higher window. Its head was now about 4 to 4.5 feet above the ground. According to her, there was nothing outside that window for a dog to stand on, and at that point, she just ran to another room in absolute terror. She doesn't really recall what happened after that. She describes the animal as being dark gray with glowing eyes, seemingly panting or baring its teeth. She didn't see the body, but had the impression that it was thin. Unfortunately, she doesn't recall the time of day, month, or season. My parents tell me there's likely some American Indian burial ground in the area, as there had been excavations near the river, which yielded Native American arrowheads and other miscellaneous artifacts. I know it's been mentioned in some of the encounters you've presented, a proximity to rivers and Native American burial grounds. I even asked my mother if there were cornfields around the area, since that too has been mentioned in the encounters. She said only the small patch of corn stalks in their own backyard. I don't think that qualifies. The area around my grandparents' house was not really wooded. The neighborhood was mostly large fields with a few horses and some cattle. The areas around the river are wooded now, so that was probably a lot more in 1953 than it is today. Another paranormal story about this area is that on Monster Quest episode detailing the Mothman, someone had supposedly taken dusk or night shot pictures of the Tower Bridge in 2009 and saw a flying humanoid shape or something fly off the bridge. The Tower Bridge is in the 1,000-foot range from my grandparents' house. Spooky. On August 27, 2016, my 10-year-old grandson was sitting in a car at a restaurant parking lot, waiting for his paternal grandmother. Across the street from him, on a sidewalk, he noticed a large creature, which I determined to be 7 to 8 feet tall, just from talking with him. It was walking on 2 legs towards a wooded area at the end of a sidewalk and disappeared into some brush. The creature did not appear concerned about my grandson, as it was in no hurry. When I asked him about what he had seen, he described a classic canine-type dogman with red eyes. His distance from creature was approximately 30 feet. Daly City is a semi-rural with many pockets of woodlands and some tracts of forest. The area where he saw the creature has paved roads and sidewalks, ringed with areas of trees. I am 24 years old, male, and live in the middle of nowhere. Literally. I will be short and simple about my encounter. I was getting home late one day after dropping my sister off at the airport in Lamar, Colorado. I live just under 7 miles north of the Oklahoma border on 250 acres of land. I have a trap line running around my property for coyotes. The first 2 traps I checked were empty, so I headed south. And that's when I saw this thing. At first, I thought it was a coyote, a big coyote. It was almost 5 feet tall, on all 4s. It was caught in my trap and was running around, making a dust cloud. And then it stopped and looked right at me. Now, I use a Duke, a 3-leg hold trap, so I can catch a variety of things in it. Anyway, I slammed on the brakes and my truck stalled. Because it's a manual. I was fumbling for the keys to start it. It's an old farm truck with a carburetor on it, and it had quite an afterfire. Once it had heard that, it lunged at me and roared. I saw that its hand, not paw but a hand, caught in my trap. Right hand to be exact. It had probably been looking for the dead rabbit I had in the bait hole next to the trap. It then stood up and ripped the 2 earth anchors I had, 24 inches in the ground, right out. It took me a long time to put them in with a 10-pound hammer. but it pulled them straight out within 15 seconds. After it did that, it just stood there looking right at me. It felt like an eternity, and I knew that my Magnum would do nothing to stop this thing if it came at me. I prayed to God that it wouldn't even come for me or in my truck. I was looking at it in shock and awe and noticed that it had orange eyes. They weren't glowing. Instead, they had a tint, like a cat's eyes in the dark. They may have been reflecting my headlights. I can't be sure. It then took a step towards me, curled up its upper lip showing me its teeth, and they were humongous. The longest two had to have been about 4 to 5 inches long. It then growled at me, and then it was gone in the blink of an eye. I was scared crapless then. I jammed the truck into gear and spun the tires, getting the hell out of Dodge. But, like I said earlier, it seemed like an eternity, but it must have lasted no more than 30 seconds at max. I later returned with an Indian friend of mine. I grew up with him and trusted him. He told me some stories that were passed down through his grandparents' tribe and mentioned something about a loup-garou, or a French werewolf. He also told me how fur trappers in the late 17 to 1800s were chased off the land in the Rockies from this thing, apparently. After some research online, I found your channel, and here I am now. Hey guys, if you enjoyed my video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and make sure you turn on notifications as I upload content daily, or if not, almost daily. I hope you're enjoying my content. I have a bunch of cool more stuff coming out featuring all sorts of different things. And remember everybody, always fear what lurks beneath.